Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming. I just want to start by saying that I cannot take credit for this awesome subtitle here. All credit for that goes to Shelley. No extra charge. So I'm Zeke. This is Shelley. We are two members of the GitHub team at Electron. And we're hubbers. So we're going to talk a little bit about Electron today. We're going to give you a little demo, talk a little bit about what Electron is, briefly about how it works. But then we're actually going to sit down and have a conversation, hopefully sit down, and have a conversation about the state of the project and how we're maintaining it and where we're taking it. So just to cut right to the chase, this is essentially what Electron is. Electron is Google's open source Chromium browser with Node.js integrated right into it. So it's kind of a supercharged web browser. You're all probably familiar with Google Chrome and Google Chromium. It's a very active open source project with, of course, a very fast JavaScript interpreter, which was called V8, which was extracted into a project called Node some years ago, which you're probably also very familiar with. So with Chromium, you get all these really awesome development tools, like the latest JavaScript features. So I just looked this morning, and it actually has Chromium has like full support for every feature in ES 2016, which is pretty incredible. Async await is like a really nice way to write asynchronous code that doesn't feel as confusing as traditional JavaScript callbacks. And with Electron and with Chromium, you actually get async await out of the box. So you don't have to like write code and then transpile it using a tool like Babel or something like that. You can just write it right in your Electron app. So you get all these really awesome features. Of course, ES6 or ES template literals for writing template strings and things like that. And then, of course, all of the benefits that you're used to from Chrome's dev tools are also available in Electron. So there's a huge list of all these great features that you get for free when you're building an Electron app. And these come from Chromium. And then, of course, Node.js is part of the mix as well. So you get all these APIs that come with Node Core. Like in an Electron app, unlike a typical browser, you can actually reach out to Node and make file system calls to read files off the disk or write files to disk. Or you can make low-level HTTP calls or network requests. You can find out things about the operating system, and you can even create like sandboxed V8 code environments and things like that. So having Node at your disposal in this browser environment is just really powerful. And then when you add NPM userland on top of that, you have 560,000 plus modules developed by the JavaScript community that you can also bring into your Electron apps. So in addition to just the core awesomeness of Chromium, the core awesomeness of Node, you also have this huge community of people creating like 500 packages a day, all of which, or most of which, can be dropped right into an Electron app. So it's really powerful. And just the marriage of Node and Chromium is just this really happy thing. So another great thing about Electron is just that when you create an app with an Electron, you can package it and distribute it on all these different desktop platforms. So you can create Windows installers, you can create Mac DMGs, you can create Linux packages, and you can even publish your apps on the Windows App Store and the Mac App Store. And Canonical is also working on this Flatpak installation tool, which is kind of their own sort of notion of an app store. So we're like realizing this dream of people being able to actually write once and deploy to multiple targets. So just to give a sense of who's actually involved in Electron development right now, of course you probably know Adam and GitHub Desktop, awesome Electron apps developed internally. But also Microsoft is really getting pretty heavily invested. Visual Studio Code, Skype, and the Teams app are all Electron apps now. And then Atlassian is getting in the game. They've now got a Trello desktop app. Of course, Slack. And Automatic has their WordPress desktop app. And this is Simple Note next to it. And then on the right side here, we've got some sort of friends of the Electron community. So the Figma app is like this really powerful, awesome, collaborative vector image editing tool. It's kind of, if you're familiar with Illustrator or Sketch, it's kind of like the same thing, except it's web-based, and you can have multiple people editing content and files simultaneously. It's really cool. Of course, Hyper is a terminal that all written in HTML and JavaScript. WebTorrent, DAT is a file sharing system. And then just a little shout out for the Google Play music developer thing. So if you've been around the conference for a few days, you may have run into this kid, Kyler, who's sitting here in the front row. Kyler is up here in the Bay Area promoting a company that he's working on to advance the cause of solar energy and figuring out ways to create a decentralized networks of solar energy building. So Kyler's actually working on an Electron app to track like real-time changes in energy prices. So even though there are lots of large-scale applications like from Microsoft and GitHub that are using Electron, there are also lots of little guys too who are making really cool sort of internal tools with Electron. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Shelley, and we're going to do a little demo.
Hey, I'm Shelley. Right now, we're just going to talk a little bit about making a simplistic Electron demo. So here you can see we make a new folder and then move into it. We set up our package.json with npm init. We install Electron, and then we create two files, main.js, a JavaScript file, and then an index.html. Next here, in our JavaScript file, we'll import the app and browser window APIs from Electron. And then when the app is ready, we'll create a new browser window. And then we'll load the index.html we just created. And then we'll open DevTools. So here in the index.html file, we'll initialize some simplistic styles, just a background color. And then we'll put some simple text there, just a hello world. Finally, in our package.json, we'll initialize a little start script, electron dot, which is just custom loads all the files in the current directory, which would jump back here into main.js and load that. All right, then we'll run the start script and see what it looks like. All right, so you'll see here it's pretty much probably what you expected. You'll see that simple hello world text we set up, and then you'll see the fact that we opened DevTools. So next, you'll see one of the most important parts of Electron and one of the things that makes it more unique. So here, we're leveraging one of the node APIs, FS, and we're going to load in all the files in the current directory. Here, because we have access to the DOM, we can load in all those files and then display it in the index.html you can see next. All right, next I'm going to talk a little bit about Forge. Forge is a tool that lets you create more advanced Electron applications. It lets you package and distribute them. It also basically makes use of proven community tools so that you can build and add different platforms and frameworks on top of it.
Uh-oh. That's weird.
All right, so basically next, this just walks through, you're going to download Electron Forge. You're going to call Electron Forge to initialize a new application. And then all you need to do, because it comes with a series of sensible defaults, is just load the start script that comes with it.
So disregard the for np there. That's actually supposed to be npm install. I think we got a typo at the last minute there.
And then in order to see a lot more of the best Electron resources that you could use to create apps like this, you just want to go to electron.atom.io, which contains all the documentation and resources to more learning. All right, thank you. We're going to go to some Q&A.
Hey everyone, I'm Nathan Henderson with the GitHub Professional Services team, and thank you so much for joining us in this session, and thank you to Zeke and Shelley. I have been able to be the learner in a lot of these sessions, which has been amazing, and for some of you who came to workshop day earlier in the week, you may have seen me and Eric Hollenberry teach a very basic Intro to Electron workshop, but it's really all thanks to the amazing people on the Electron team. So for this Q&A, I'll be kind of your avatar. I'm going to ask the hard-hitting questions, hopefully, maybe not too hard-hitting, of Zeke and Shelley. But I'll give you a softball to start. How about, can you tell me how you came to work on Electron at GitHub?
Yeah, so I've been at GitHub for about a year and a half. I've been involved in the Node community for a long time. I used to work at Heroku and NPM. Just kind of trying to advance the cause of JavaScript and bring it into new environments beyond the browser. Jessica Lord was one of the sort of founding members of the Electron team at GitHub, and I had interacted with her at various conferences and stuff. So I think that was kind of my getting my foot in the door there, was just being involved with the Node community. So I've been, like I said, I've been on the team for about a year and a half now. Working remotely, and it's been awesome to see the team grow from 3 people to now 7. Does that work?
Successful?
Okay.
Cool. All right. I'm actually a former GitHub intern. I worked at GitHub this previous summer, and then turned around and then started working on the Electron team towards the end of the summer. Yeah, that's really briefest overview.
That's awesome. Thank you. So to the larger ecosystem around Electron, can you tell me a little bit about who is actually building and maintaining Electrons? I know a lot of people think of it as a GitHub project, but it feels like it's more than that.
Sure. OK. So Electron is very much a community effort. We had a recent mini summit in Tokyo a few weeks ago, and some of the companies represented there, besides GitHub, were Google. We also had OpenFin, Opera, Slack, Microsoft, and Atlassian. All those companies build apps on top of Electron, and members of those teams are almost as integral, and in some cases, just help move Electron forward in terms of just adding new features, dealing with Chromium upgrades.
Yeah, so just to add to that a little bit, so some of the companies who are betting big on Electron have actually hired internal teams to work specifically on Electron. So Slack was one of the early companies that actually hired numerous desktop engineers, but Microsoft has gotten in the game, and that's been really helpful to us because Microsoft takes security very seriously, so their interest in upgrading Chromium as quickly as possible means that they're actually putting resources towards making that happen. So there's now a team of very awesome people in Prague and St. Petersburg who are the Microsoft internal Electron team, and they create custom builds of Electron for the various teams within Microsoft. So what we're seeing is that the GitHub team is actually able to, we're slowly starting to be able to think more about the larger issues of the project and less about the nitty-gritty, the daily details of just keeping things up to date.
So with so many companies involved, so many time zones involved, it sounds like, what are some of the things the Electron team are doing to just work together and collaborate asynchronously and across time?
Yeah, so we have like a team that is really distributed around the world. Even the team at GitHub, the Electron team at GitHub is all over. So obviously, we work very asynchronously. We mostly use GitHub and Slack for that. One of the things we try to do is not have any particular individual responsible for one thing. So to avoid bottlenecks, we always want to have more than one person who's able to handle any given problem.
To add to that, we also have multiple stand-ups every week. Typically, you attend 1 or 2, however many you can get to. They're spread across different times to accommodate as many time zones as possible so that everybody has an opportunity to go at least once.
Awesome. So now I'll ask a tougher question. I'll talk to customers a lot. I'll do a lot of meetings with internal teams at big companies, and they're curious about Electron to build internal applications. And like a lot of companies, they're averse to risk. So if I am big customer company potentially thinking about an Electron app, do I need to worry about Electron being abandoned or eclipsed? What does the ecosystem feel like, and what are the things in place to make me feel better about that?
So like I was saying earlier, I just think that the fact that companies like Microsoft and Slack have gotten involved and are really betting on Electron, it would be very surprising to me to see a lot of these companies pivoting these apps off to some other platform. So I think Electron is definitely a pretty stable thing for now.
I mean, generally, when enough companies are invested and there's a significant community contribution and basically interest in seeing a lot of key apps that companies create, then, I mean, there's significant impetus on every side.
Also, just to add to that, GitHub obviously has numerous projects using Electron, so we have our own internal customers, and we'll be around just to keep them happy.
I feel better already. Thank you. Okay, I'll give you the 1-2 punch of hard questions now. I'll oftentimes occasionally go to, say, Hacker News. I shouldn't. I can't tear myself away at times. I'll see what looks to be an awesome new app that someone is trying to show the site, and then immediately, if it's discovered it's an Electron app, there's like a seething rage from a tiny subset of apparently native developers who feel like they should do everything their way. And occasionally they'll say stuff like, oh, Electron apps are memory hogs or whatever. What do you say to that? And like, why shouldn't I get hung up on that too much?
Yeah, so obviously there are trade-offs, right? So you could develop a native app that would have a smaller footprint, be more performant, smaller file size, things like that. But then you'd be writing it for a single platform and using potentially proprietary tools and proprietary programming languages to do that. So really the value of Electron is being able to use open technologies to write applications and deploy them to multiple platforms. So there is a trade-off. I think probably the biggest factor that leads to people making those kinds of accusations is just the fact that Chrome itself is a very resource-intensive application. But the Chrome team is continually making improvements to the way Chromium runs, and just in Chrome 57, we saw like a 30% improvement in battery life for laptops running the Chrome browser. So they're going to continue to improve that. Another thing is this sort of pie-in-the-sky idea that people have been talking about for a long time, which is the concept of like an Electron Runtime, which would be a shared thing that you install on your computer where you have multiple apps that are sharing a common Chromium component. And in that way, the amount of resources consumed could be significantly lower. But for now, that's just a conversation. It's not necessarily something that we are actively pursuing.
Two other things important to note are that while we do leverage a lot of Chromium, we don't actually bundle the entirety of Chromium into Electron. We typically just bundle in what we need. And then also important to note that Visual Studio Code and Hyper both have started using Canvas to render some of their parts of the application, which has sped up things significantly. So while there is a certain part of Electron that does use some memory, there's definitely ways to deal with that and approach that in a way that has significant potential for effectiveness.
Thank you.
So since we're kind of just on the track of talking about ways that your app could be like faster, one thing that comes up a lot is like if you are developing an application and you have a bunch of require statements in your main application process, that's going to contribute significantly to the startup time of your app. So one of the ways to work around that is to kind of load the minimum viable set of dependencies that you need at startup time, and then have some kind of asynchronous process that loads in the rest of the code that you need once the app is actually running. So the perceived performance from the user will be a quick startup time.
Cool, thank you. Keeping on my corporate customer hat for a moment, I'm glad you mentioned Microsoft being really concerned about security. I think we all are, but and making improvements to Electron there. Are Electron applications maybe more vulnerable to security exploits than just a typical, like a full stack Node.js web application? Are there specific concerns I should think about there?
Some of those concerns, I mean, in general, I would say not really, but the only few concerns you'd need to keep in mind would be that since Electron has access to a lot of native APIs, that you do have the ability to write to the file system, which is something that a pure web application doesn't have. However, there are steps you can take in Electron, of course, to minimize those issues. So you can disable node integration and keep parts of your rendering process in a sandbox, which would prevent a lot of the errors that you'd typically be concerned about from a security standpoint.
Yeah, so just to add to that, in general, sort of the most unsafe thing you can do when building an Electron app is opening a web view that has sort of unfettered access to untrusted content on the internet. So because of the way Electron enables node integration, a malicious website could actually capitalize on the availability of the node APIs and exploit a system that's exploit an app that has not put the proper protections in place. So we're actually working towards setting safer defaults and also just adding lots of warning messages when people are using the unsafe options in development. So you'll start seeing more console warnings saying like, I hope you know what you're doing. But in general, if you are making an Electron app that needs to talk to the internet, just make sure that you are creating a whitelist of domains, trusted domains that you control, and that the content on those pages is also exclusive to that domain. So even if you have something like you're loading a JavaScript file from a CDN or something like that, that is a potential vulnerability. So just locking down the remote content is one big step. Another big aspect of security is just that Chrome is an evergreen browser. So when fixes are made to Chrome, or to Chromium, they automatically trickle down to users because the Chromium browser, the Chrome browser updates itself automatically all the time. Electron is a little different because it's actually like snapshots of Chromium from the past, and so we work to backport security fixes into older versions of Electron, but really it's right now it's kind of on the Electron. It's the onus is on the Electron developers to keep an eye on those things and proactively update their Electron apps. And then the other thing is this question of the auto updater. So Electron apps actually have, Electron has an API that you can use to allow your apps to update themselves by pinging a server to see if there's a new version of your app available, downloading a new version, and restarting. The app can restart itself. So right now, that's a little bit of, requires a little bit of legwork on the part of the developer. We'd like to get to a point where when you're developing an Electron application, it's easier to get that kind of auto-updating for free. Because one of the most important aspects of security is being able to have those updates from Chromium trickle all the way down to end-user Electron apps as quickly as possible. So that was probably the biggest theme of our recent mini-summit, so we're definitely prioritizing that.
So putting on my developer hat now, no longer corporate manager, I'm going to think about building apps because I was so inspired. Let's say I'm a native, in quotes, developer for Windows or Mac. What are the things that I should be learning and focusing on to build good Electron applications?
Well, the very first thing I think of is actually Typescript, which is kind of a contentious subject. But GitHub Desktop and Slack and Visual Studio Code are some of the biggest Electron apps that are written in TypeScript. And I think the real benefit there are a number of benefits that you get from TypeScript, but just to give a sense of what TypeScript is, it's kind of a superset of the JavaScript language that lets you specify the sort of input and output types that your application is expecting. So you're specifically expecting a number or a string or something like that. And it's surprising to see how many early warnings you get in your code when you start using TypeScript, just to find potential problems in your application before you actually deploy it. Also, when you write your applications in TypeScript, you get this benefit of the API of the application actually being sort of implicitly documented. So one of the things we rolled out in Electron recently was support for Electron typings. So if you're using TypeScript and you are using a TypeScript-aware editor like Visual Studio Code or Atom with an extension, then the Electron development process is much more. You can spend more time in your editor and less time reading docs because the autocomplete is aware of all of the method names and all the parameters for all the methods and the return types and all those kinds of things. So I think I'm saying this because I know that the GitHub Desktop team, they were a bunch of native developers for Windows and Mac, and so they kind of had to just bite the bullet and become JavaScript developers, potentially to their chagrin. But I know that using TypeScript has been something that has made it a more manageable process for them.
Yeah, you can also start from what you know in the sense that Electron is a platform, and you can leverage frameworks you're familiar with, like React, for example, or Vue, which is newer but entering vogue a little more. Yeah.
Cool, thank you. A follow-up to that maybe is easier? I don't know. Let's say I'm a web developer and I want to build an Electron app. What do I need to know about desktop development or specifically to Electron to be a good Electron developer?
I don't know if I have an immediate answer to that. So there are some sort of subtle differences between like the sort of user experience patterns that people are accustomed to in web browsers versus desktop applications. One of the most obvious ones is like when you hover over a link in a web browser, your cursor turns into a little hand and the link becomes underlined, whereas in desktop applications, typically that doesn't happen. Your cursor remains an arrow. So there are all these little subtleties that people have to kind of account for when developing Electron applications. It's a little bit like Wild Wild West right now in terms of just like the UI patterns. Like, so unlike Apple, we don't have like a human interface guidelines where we like outline the details of how every specific interface element should look, and so it's kind of up to developers right now to decide whether they want their interface to look Windows-esque or look Mac-esque, or if it should just be branded entirely on its own. And we haven't necessarily seen any solutions come out of the community for this. Like, I kind of would have expected that there would be some more like UI toolkits for this, but we haven't really seen them. So I think, for the most part, app developers are kind of solving these problems individually.
Yeah, you definitely are spelunking a little more. You know, like we provide an API for a menu, for example, and that'd be something you couldn't access in a pure web app. But I mean, you're still interfacing with it in like the same JavaScripty way that you would be a pure web app. But it's basically just learning about the things that you can access that you couldn't previously access, and then sort of doing your best with the toolkit that you have to make it look like, obviously, a native application for whatever platform you happen to be developing on.
And for anyone who's not familiar, the Electron API Demos app is a really good kitchen sink example of pretty much everything you can do that's special in Electron, right? Okay, so something that I have been asked a lot, and I know I've personally struggled with sometimes, is like I go into NPM, I just start searching for modules. Sometimes I just search by broad functionality. Sometimes I'll punch in Electron because people tend to name things Electron whatever. How do I find good modules, or how do I know what's the best one to use? Is there a kind of rubric or metric that you use to rate things in your mind?
Rubric's directly a little bit harder, but there is an organization called Electron Userland that provides a lot of great resources for getting started with that. It's full of a lot of the most active Electron users who just don't happen to be hubbers, and they definitely have a lot more robust an understanding of what modules are good to use, what modules might suit your purposes best. So to that end, I would definitely recommend starting at Electron Userland. It's just electron-userland, or electron.atom.io, the website that we showed up earlier on the slides.
Yeah, so there's a repo called Awesome Electron. There's this whole awesome repo phenomenon where people collect links about a particular topic, and so there's one for Electron. That's a great place to start, just because the curators of that repo are quite discerning, so you can't just throw links up there. But this is a problem that's very near and dear to my heart, having worked at NPM, designing the package page that people still see today. The sidebar has some useful information, but nowadays I actually mostly use github.com to kind of make an assessment of a particular package. So if you're looking at a repository page for a package, you can see how recently it was updated, the number of contributors. It's easy to browse the code. There are a number of signals on a repo page that can kind of give at least a rough idea of the health of a package. But it all depends. Like some packages, maybe they haven't been updated in 5 years, but it's because they're feature complete and they do what they're supposed to do. So the Electron team recently at our mini summit, we kind of made a decision that we should start becoming a little bit more opinionated about the recommendations that we make for what tools to use in NPM userland. So part of the value of userland is that it's like everyone can do exactly what they want, and if you don't find the thing that you want, then you can roll your own, and it's really easy to do. But we don't want people wasting their time. We don't want people having to spend half of their development time just trying to find the right module to solve a particular problem. So what we've decided to do is start baking more recommendations into our documentation about known modules that work well with Electron. So stay tuned for more of that.
To pile on that slightly, the community is definitely the best metric for that. There's no real artificial metric for what's best, so it's easier, like Zeke just said, to use the signals that you can see in the resources that you find to make the most informed decision.
Cool. Okay, $1 million question. What about mobile? I would love to be able to do something with Electron on mobile devices. Sorry for putting you on the spot.
So the big difficulty there is currently that Apple does not allow third-party web rendering engines, which makes things difficult. Like even Chrome for iOS uses WebKit, doesn't use its own thing. So it'd be absolutely amazing to have at a certain point, but I think to a certain extent that would sort of depend on some things from us potentially perhaps, but Apple primarily.
Yeah, so I don't have a good answer to this question, but I think it's what we all want, right? Like, it just seems like a natural progression of where we'll end up. So in the beautiful future, we will write apps in open technologies and be able to deploy them to all devices. We're not there yet. One thing that I have seen that Electron users have been able to do is that they'll write a client-side application using React or Angular or any of these popular frameworks, and then they will wrap their client in an Electron app for desktop, and then they'll use PhoneGap to deploy those applications on mobile. So right now it's kind of a mix of Electron and Cordova to make that happen. We're not actively seeking to make Electron work on mobile, but I think we all recognize that that's would be a nice place for JavaScript developers to be one day.
So speaking of the future, what does the kind of immediate future hold for Electron? What can you tell me about what's coming next?
All right, so a few things we're moving towards at the moment are currently Electron doesn't support semantic versioning just because it's difficult to deal with hard dependencies on Chromium and Node. But we've decided to change a little bit about how we update Chromium. So semantic version is in fact coming, just normal major minor patch. At the moment, it was like pretty custom to major was breaking changes, breaking API changes. Minor was minor Chrome updates or major Node updates, I believe. And then minor was just nothing should change. Your app should still work, small patches. We also have a new website coming, which will make it easier to get started with Electron and see the resources at your disposal and the best way to get started with learning or developing on Electron. Go for it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we are in the process of localizing the website, so documentation will be available in different languages. We're using this really awesome tool called CrowdIn that has a GitHub integration where you can actually connect it to a GitHub repo, specify where your source content is. You can write Markdown, you can have structured JSON, YAML files, things like that. CrowdIn will pull that content into its platform. People can OAuth into CrowdIn using their GitHub account and then just start translating strings to whatever language they want. And the content actually propagates back to the GitHub repo by a pull request. So we're kind of setting up all this integration right now, and we will soon have a version of the website that's in a bunch of different languages. And it's also going to be a Node website instead of a Jekyll static website. So that's going to open up a lot of possibilities for us to do more interesting things with it. On the semantic versioning note, I think the takeaway would just be, for 2.0 of Electron, it may not actually be many new bells and whistles. It'll probably just be Chromium 61. So each time we do a Chromium upgrade or a Node major upgrade, that's going to bump the major version of Electron. So I think we saw this from React, right? You know, they went from 0.14 to 15.0 or something like that. So I think a lot of projects sort of have their own notion of how to do versioning until they see the light and decide to just follow Semver. So we're going to do our best to do that. Yeah.
Thank you. I think with that, I could sit here and ask you questions all day, but they won't let me. So I will say that you'll both, Zeke and Shelley, will be here for a little bit or around for a little bit after they cut me off. So you can continue to ask them great questions. I know a lot of you have questions about how as a new contributor you could best add to the community and to the project. So feel free to stick around and chat with us wherever we can. But with that, I think I will give you a hearty round of applause and thank you for all of your amazing questions and answers. Appreciate it.